Imagine a courtroom filled with the weight of anticipation. The air is thick with tension. Everyone on edge, waiting for a verdict that could change lives forever. The judge, the lawyers, and the onlookers are all focused on the case, unaware that something extraordinary is about to unfold right before their eyes. In the midst of this serious, high-stakes moment, a tiny girl, barely noticeable among the adults, sits quietly in the back. She's holding the leash of her dog, Max, who rests patiently by her side. But what no one knows is that Emma, the little girl, and Max share a secret, a bond so deep it transcends words. Then, in a split second, something unexpected happens. Emma gives a subtle signal to Max, a secret gesture only he understands. The courtroom, focused on the drama at hand, doesn't notice at first. But Max, he's about to do something that will leave everyone stunned. What happens next shocks the entire room, halting everything and leaving everyone in disbelief. No one could have predicted this. A simple gesture, a small signal, changes the course of everything. The tension in the room shifts, and all eyes are on the girl and her dog as the unbelievable moment unfolds. Stay with me, because what happens in the next few moments will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about connection, trust, and the power of a bond that goes beyond human understanding. What did Emma and Max do that no one saw coming? Let's dive in. This wasn't just any ordinary day in court. The courtroom was buzzing with quiet murmurs as people filed in, taking their seats. The air was thick with anticipation, but the mood was far from relaxed. Today's case was one of the most high-profile in recent memory. Lawyers shuffled papers, witnesses took their positions, and everyone in the room seemed to be bracing for something that could turn the lives of many people upside down. It was a case that involved a deep emotional conflict, one that could change the course of a family's future. In the center of the room stood the judge, a stern figure whose face reflected the seriousness of the proceedings. Everyone knew that today's verdict would have far-reaching consequences. At the back of the room, tucked away in a quiet corner, sat a young girl named Emma, no older than 7 or 8. She wasn't an obvious figure in this dramatic scene. She wasn't a lawyer or a witness. She wasn't even an adult who could fully understand the weight of the case. But there was something about her presence that seemed out of place in this room filled with adult tensions and legal jargon. Her small figure, sitting so still beside her dog, Max, seemed almost surreal, as if she didn't belong in this world of formalities and protocols. Max, her golden retriever, lay calmly at her feet, his head resting on the floor. To the casual observer, they might have appeared like any ordinary child and her dog, out of place but harmless in the backdrop of a serious courtroom. What no one could have guessed, however, was a connection that Emma and Max shared, a bond so deep that they could communicate in ways no one else could understand. Emma and Max weren't just any pair. They had been inseparable from the moment Emma first met him. Over time, they developed a unique, silent language, a system of signals, subtle and unspoken, that allowed them to communicate with ease. A glance, a gesture, a hand movement. These small cues were enough to tell Max exactly what Emma wanted or needed, even in the most challenging of situations. The presence of Emma and Max in the courtroom wasn't unusual. Emma had been brought to the court by her family as part of the ongoing case. Max, as her constant companion, was there to provide her comfort and support, especially considering the emotional nature of the case. Emma had always been a shy child, often overwhelmed by situations where she was surrounded by unfamiliar faces or intense emotions. Max, however, was her anchor, her calming presence when everything around her seemed too much to bear. Max was more than just a dog to Emma. He was her confidant, her protector, and her unwavering source of comfort in a world that could sometimes feel cold and indifferent. But today, there was something different in the air. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. You could feel in the way people whispered to one another, their voices hushed in reverence for the gravity of the case at hand. Every word spoken seemed like it carried the weight of the world. And yet, Emma remained calm, her gaze steady and focused. She wasn't fidgeting like the other children who had come to court that day. She wasn't looking around the room, distracted by the commotion. Instead, she was completely focused on Max, her loyal companion. As the proceedings continued, something shifted. Emma's small hand moved ever so slightly beneath the table, just enough to catch Max's attention. Max, who had been resting quietly, perked up at the slightest movement, his eyes instantly locking onto Emma's. In that brief moment, something passed between them, an understanding, a silent agreement that only they could comprehend. The air in the courtroom seemed to shift, a subtle change that no one could quite put their finger on, but everyone could feel. The courtroom, which had been so filled with tense anticipation, now felt as though it was holding its collective breath. The judge continued speaking, the lawyer on the other side arguing their case. No one paid attention to Emma or to the subtle signals she had just sent to Max. But in that quiet moment between them, something incredible was about to unfold. What no one in that room knew, what no one could predicted, was that the bond between Emma and Max wasn't just about companionship or loyalty. It was about something deeper, something that could not be fully understood by anyone except the two of them. They shared a language that went beyond the limitations of words and gestures. In that moment, it was clear that Emma and Max were connected in a way that was about to surprise everyone in the room, and the consequences would be more far-reaching than anyone could have ever imagined. No one could have anticipated what happened next. What started as an ordinary day in court, a typical case, a routine proceeding, suddenly took an unexpected turn. The eyes of the courtroom remained fixed on the judge, the attorneys, and the witnesses, completely unaware that a quiet, secret signal was about to set off a chain of events that would change everything. As the courtroom drama continued, the quiet gesture between Emma and Max would soon become the focus of everyone's attention, leaving no one unaffected by what they had just witnessed. The unexpected was coming, and no one was ready for it. Stay tuned, because what happens next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the bond between a child and her dog. What Emma and Max did in that moment will not only shock the courtroom, but it will also change the course of the entire trial. Meet Emma, a brave young girl who is far more than she appeared at first glance. At first, you might think she's just like any other child, quiet, reserved, and unassuming. But behind her gentle eyes and soft-spoken words lay an extraordinary bond that would prove to be a force stronger than most could imagine. Emma, though young, had faced challenges that would shape her into someone special. She had never been the loudest voice in the room, but her actions always spoke volumes. What made Emma stand out wasn't just her intelligence or kindness. It was her connection with Max, her dog. Max wasn't just any dog. He was Emma's protector, her confidant, and above all, her best friend. From the moment they met, something clicked. They were two souls bound together, not by fate, but by a connection that defied the ordinary. Emma had been through a lot in her young life. Her family had moved several times, and she often found herself in situations where she felt alone or overwhelmed. It was during one of these moves that she met Max, and from that moment, their lives were forever intertwined. Max was a golden retriever, his fur a rich shade of gold that caught the sunlight just right. But it wasn't his appearance that made him special. It was the way he and Emma communicated. They had an almost unspoken understanding of each other. While most people would talk to their pets, Emma and Max had developed a language of their own, one that went far beyond barking or commands. Max understood Emma in a way that no one else could. A simple glance from Emma was enough to tell Max exactly what she needed, whether it was comfort, protection, or just a moment of calm. It was this unbreakable bond that led Emma to bring Max to the courtroom on this particular day. Little did anyone know, the seemingly ordinary decision would prove to be the key to a life-changing moment. But Emma wasn't the only one who had a role in this story. In the courtroom, there were other important figures whose lives were about to be irrevocably altered by the events that were about to unfold. First, there was a judge, a man whose decades of experience had taught him to remain impartial, calm, and composed no matter the case. He had presided over countless trials, and nothing had ever rattled him. He was known for being a fair and firm judge, someone who was always in control of the courtroom. But that day, when Emma and Max entered the room, Evie couldn't have anticipated how their presence would change everything. Then there were the lawyers. On one side, there was a defense attorney, a sharp, quick-witted individual who was well-versed in the art of persuasion. He had his arguments prepared, ready to defend his client no matter the cost. On the other side, the prosecutor, equally skilled, equally determined, was fighting for what he believed to be justice. Both men had done their research, prepared their witnesses, and were ready to take on whatever the day's case threw at them. But both were unaware that the outcome of this trial could be swayed by something as simple as a dog and a young girl. Among the witnesses, there was a mother whose face showed the burden of years of heartache, and a father whose quiet demeanor masked the emotional turmoil inside. Their emotions were high, their hopes just as elevated. They came to the courtroom, hoping for closure, for resolution, for justice, but they had no idea how Emma and Max would play a role in what would happen next. And then there was the family of Emma herself, the people who knew her best, her mother, who had always supported her daughter's quiet strength, and her father, who had long believed in the silent power of connection between a child and her pet. They knew Emma's bond with Max was special, but they had no idea how powerful it truly was. Emma's parents, though aware of her unusual connection with the dog, had never seen an action quite like this before. They had never imagined that this small, seemingly insignificant bond would become the key to changing the course of an entire courtroom drama. Emma, sitting quietly in her seat with Max at her side, had no idea what was coming. She was just a little girl, trying to get through a difficult day in court. She had been told to sit still, to be quiet, to let the adults take care of things. She had no intention of drawing attention to herself. But Max was her safe place, her comfort in the middle of a storm. And when Emma felt that familiar bond between them growing stronger, she instinctively knew that she could rely on him. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that the bond between them would soon become the catalyst for a turning point no one had expected. The room filled with the murmurs of people who didn't understand what was about to unfold. No one could have guessed that this courtroom, filled with seasoned professionals, would witness a moment that would change everything. No one knew that the key to the case wasn't in the hands of the attorneys or in the words of the witnesses, but rather in the unspoken language between a young girl and her dog. Emma's bond with Max was about to prove that sometimes the most powerful forces in the world aren't seen with the eyes, but felt with the heart. And it was about to shake the courtroom in ways no one could have imagined. The case at hand was far from an ordinary one. It wasn't just another routine trial. This was a case that involved deep emotional stakes, one that carried the weight of years of personal conflict and a future that could be forever altered by the final judgment. The courtroom, which was usually a place for legal arguments and procedural formalities, had become a battleground where raw emotions were laid bare and the lives of everyone involved were on the line. As the proceedings unfolded, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Every person in the room seemed to feel the gravity of the situation, their eyes glued to the judge, whose face remained impassive. The courtroom was a microcosm of uncertainty, with emotions running high on all sides. Families, lawyers, and even the onlookers could sense the underlying tension, the quiet but unmistakable anxiety that seemed to hang in the air like a heavy fog. People in the galleries shifted in their seats, their murmurs barely audible over the weight of the moment. It was a rare sight, a courtroom full of people who were genuinely on edge, waiting for something to happen, hoping that the judgment would bring clarity, closure, and, for some, justice. At the center of it all was a family divided. The case was one of custody and guardianship, with two parents locked in a bitter battle over the future of their child. It was clear from the start that the stakes couldn't be higher. The young girl at the center of the case, Emma, was caught in the middle of a conflict between her mother and father, each of them desperate to prove they were the better parent, the more capable caretaker. The tension between the two parents had been building for years, and now, in this courtroom, it was coming to a head. Each side had brought their evidence, their witnesses, and their arguments. They were both determined to win, knowing that the outcome of the trial would change the course of their lives and the future of their daughter forever. The legal teams were sharp, their arguments carefully constructed, their questions pointed. Each attorney was prepared to do whatever it took to sway the judge's decision in favor of their client. They knew that the ruling would not only have a personal impact on them, but would also affect the future of a young girl caught in a tug-of-war between two parents who couldn't agree on what was best for her. The tension in the room was palpable as the case continued. Each new piece of evidence, each new testimony, adding another layer to the emotional complexity of the trial. The emotions weren't confined to just the parents and the attorneys, either. The witnesses, many of whom had been called to speak on behalf of one side or the other, were visibly shaken. Some had personal relationships with the parents and were torn between their loyalty to them and the knowledge of what was truly best for Emma. Others were professionals, therapists, counselors, social workers, who had observed Emma's life from a more objective perspective. But even they couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision that was about to be made. The little girl's future was in the hands of this courtroom, and everyone knew how important the verdict would be. Adding to the already tense atmosphere was the fact that Emma herself was sitting in the room. Her presence was a reminder to everyone that, beyond the legal arguments and courtroom drama, this case was about a child's life. It wasn't just about evidence, documents, and legal precedents. It was about Emma's well-being, her happiness, and her future. And no one knew how the final decision would affect her. The thought of a young girl being pulled from one home and thrust into another weighed heavily on everyone in the room. The emotional toll on her parents was visible, each of them trying to remain composed, but their faces betrayed the pain they were feeling. They had both spent years building a case for why they were the better parent, and now it all came down to this moment. The lawyers and judge were in the midst of discussing the details of the case, but the underlying tension never let up. Everyone in the courtroom felt the collective anticipation, the tightness in the air that seemed to grow with every passing minute. People couldn't help but shift their gaze to Emma, who sat quietly with her dog, Max, at her side. She was a symbol of innocence amidst the turmoil, a reminder of the stakes of the trial. Emma's eyes were focused on her dog, her fingers gently brushing the golden fur of Max's coat. There was something comforting about their quiet presence, something that contrasted sharply with the anxiety that filled the room. As the trial continued, it became clear that the courtroom wasn't just about presenting facts. It was about emotions. The tension in the room wasn't just created by the legal strategies at play, but by the deep personal feelings of everyone involved. The parents, desperate for the best outcome for their daughter, the attorneys, fighting for their clients, the judge, trying to make the right decision, and the witnesses, torn between truth and loyalty. All of them were caught in a web of emotion that seemed impossible to unravel. And amidst it all, there was Emma, a young girl who had no idea how the day would end, who had no way of knowing that the bond she shared with Max would soon be the key to a moment no one would ever forget. The tension, the drama, the uncertainty, it all led to this, a moment when everything would change and the future of Emma's life would be shaped not just by legal arguments, but by something far deeper. Emma and Max had something that no one else could truly comprehend, a connection so deep, so unspoken, that it was almost invisible to those around them. It wasn't something that could be seen in the usual way or easily understood by the casual observer. It was a bond built on years of shared moments, quiet understanding, and trust that had grown stronger with every passing day. What made their connection so extraordinary was that it wasn't loud or obvious. It wasn't a series of commands or spoken words. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible language, one made up of tiny cues, gestures, and glances. To anyone who might have been watching, Emma and Max appeared like a normal girl and her dog. She would occasionally pat his head, offer him a treat, or give him an affectionate smile. But those who knew them best, like Emma's family, could see the way their bond transcended these simple actions. It wasn't in the words they spoke, because Emma hardly ever needed to speak at all. She had learned early on that the smallest of hand movements could tell Max everything he needed to know. A slight twitch of her finger, a soft motion with her hand, and Max would react with precision and understanding, as though they had rehearsed it 1,000 times before. Max was no ordinary dog. He was patient, intuitive, and extraordinarily perceptive. He could sense things others couldn't: anxiety, fear, joy, anything that Emma was feeling. He could pick up on without her saying a word. Emma, in turn, had learned how to communicate her needs, her feelings, and her desires through a series of simple but highly effective signals. Sometimes it was as subtle as the way her eyes would flicker toward him when she needed his attention. Other times, it was as direct as a barely noticeable hand movement that would send him into action without anyone else even noticing. Their connection was a silent language that was uniquely their own. It was a dance of gestures so small that they could be easily missed by anyone who wasn't paying attention. But for Emma and Max, this was all they needed to understand each other perfectly. It wasn't a formalized system, but rather an instinctive understanding that had developed over time. It was an unspoken pact that, in moments of need, would allow them to act in harmony, without anyone else in the room knowing what was happening. For example, when Emma felt nervous, unsure what was going on around her, she would give Max a tiny signal, perhaps a barely perceptible tap on the leg, or a swift glance in his direction. Max would instantly respond, his body shifting, his ears perking up, ready to act. He didn't need Emma to say a word. He could tell from her movements, from the look in her eyes, what she needed, and just as silently, he would position himself in a way that would protect her or offer her comfort. There were times when the silent communication had been the only way Emma could express herself. She wasn't always comfortable in large, noisy situations like this courtroom. Crowded spaces made her feel small, insignificant, and sometimes she found herself feeling overwhelmed. But Max was always there, always by her side, acting as her anchor. When things got too tense, too overwhelming, Emma would rely on their silent signal to bring Max into action. It was her way of maintaining control over a situation that could otherwise be too much for her to handle. And Max, with his unyielding loyalty and devotion, always responded without hesitation. He had been trained not only to follow commands, but to read Emma's cues, responding in ways that defied the typical expectations of a dog. It wasn't just about reacting to fear or discomfort, though their connection extended far beyond those moments. There were times when Emma would give a small, imperceptible gesture, perhaps a soft twitch of her finger or a subtle nod of her head, and Max would respond by simply sitting closer to her, his head resting gently against her knee, as though to reassure her. Sometimes, this silent interaction would be a moment of shared joy, like when Emma would give a little laugh, and Max would wag his tail in response. These were the moments when Emma and Max were truly in sync, their bond clear in the quiet way they communicated. It was this very connection, this ability to communicate without words, that would soon prove to be a game changer. No one in the courtroom knew about their secret language. No one was aware of the unspoken cues that passed between them, the signals that no one else could detect. Everyone around Emma and Max assumed that they were just another girl and her dog, perhaps offering each other a little comfort in an unfamiliar place. But what no one realized was that Emma and Max had a language all their own, a language that was about to make its presence known in the most unexpected way. As the case continued, as the tension in the courtroom grew thicker, Emma sat still, her eyes focused on Max. Her fingers, resting gently on her lap, began to move, just the slightest twitch of her hand, a signal only Max would recognize. The moment was so small, so subtle, that no one in the room could have noticed it. But to Max, it was everything. He immediately perked up, his alert eyes locking onto Emma's, awaiting the next cue. And in that brief, silent exchange, something extraordinary was set into motion. Something that would take the courtroom by surprise and change the course of the trial forever. As the courtroom continued to hum with tension, the atmosphere growing more oppressive by the second, Emma remained as calm as ever. Her fingers rested lightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on Max, who lay beside her, still and composed. The case was reaching its peak. The arguments had been made, the witnesses had spoken, and the judge was preparing to render his final decision. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment when everything would come to a head. But in the midst of this heavy silence, Emma's mind was elsewhere. She wasn't focused on the proceedings. Her attention was on Max, her constant companion, her silent partner in this strange, emotionally charged environment. She felt it, an almost overwhelming sense of unease in the air, the emotions swirling in the courtroom, the anxious energy, the uncertainty about what would happen next were beginning to weigh on her. It was the kind of atmosphere that could make anyone feel small, out of place, or overwhelmed, but not Emma. She had learned long ago that, in times like this, she could rely on Max. She could find comfort in their quiet, unspoken communication. She knew that if she needed him, he would be there, responding to her with the kind of understanding that no one else could match. Without saying a word, without making any obvious movements, Emma sent a small, nearly imperceptible signal to Max. It was nothing more than a flick of her hand, so subtle that no one in the courtroom could have noticed it. The motion was almost like a whisper, a gesture that only Max could read. To the untrained eye, it would have looked like nothing more than a slight twitch, but to Max, it was a clear message. And the moment Emma made that signal, he responded immediately without hesitation. Max's ears perked up, his body stiffening as he moved ever so slightly, sensing the shift in the room that no one else had noticed. His golden fur gleamed under the dim light of the courtroom, but it was his eyes, wide, alert, and focused, that caught the attention of those closest to him. Max was no longer the calm, obedient dog resting by Emma's side. He had transformed in an instant. His gaze moved from Emma's hand to the entire room, as though scanning for any potential threat or disturbance. And then, with a sudden burst of energy that no one could have predicted, Max leapt into action. It happened so quickly that no one in the courtroom had time to react. In one swift motion, Max sprang to his feet, his legs extending with remarkable agility as he surged forward. The sound of his paws hitting the floor echoed to the otherwise silent room, drawing the attention of everyone within earshot. For a moment, it was as if time had frozen. The people in the courtroom, already on edge, watched in shock as Max moved with precision and purpose, his eyes locked on Emma's signal. But it wasn't just the suddenness of Max's movement that caught everyone off guard. It was what he did next. With a surprising sense of direction, Max darted toward the front of the courtroom, moving with incredible speed. His gaze never wavered from his target, and it was clear that he was responding to a call, an urgency that only he and Emma understood. The courtroom, once filled with hushed whispers and murmurs, fell into stunned silence as people realized something unexpected was unfolding right before them. The dog's movement was swift, controlled, and completely deliberate. It wasn't a random act, nor was it a result of any kind of training for traditional commands. Max wasn't running to retrieve a ball or follow a typical command like sit or stay. No, this was different. This was a reaction to a silent signal, a message sent from Emma that carried a weight no one else could feel. And in that moment, as Max closed in on his target, the tension in the room heightened. People began to stir, shifting in their seats, wondering what was happening. The judge's eyes widened, his gavel hanging in the air as he tried to make sense of the sudden turn of events. Lawyers paused mid-sentence, their arguments momentarily forgotten as they watched the dog move with uncanny precision. But what happened next would leave everyone utterly speechless. Max, with his eyes still fixed on the front of the room, made a sudden and unexpected move. He stopped mid-stride, right in front of a witness who had been giving testimony moments before. The witness, a woman who had been speaking on behalf of one of the parents, looked down in shock as Max sat before her, his gaze unwavering. The room held its breath as everyone waited, unsure of what was about to unfold. And then it happened. The woman, visibly shaken by the dog's sudden presence, hesitated. Her voice faltered, and she seemed to lose her train of thought. Max, as if sensing her hesitation, remained perfectly still, his eyes never leaving hers. The room was silent, save for the soft sound of Max's breathing. What no one realized at that moment was that Emma's signal had been more than just a way to comfort Max. It had been a signal to him that it was time to act, time to intervene in a way that no one could have expected. The room was filled with uncertainty and confusion, but what was clear was that Max had done exactly what Emma had asked of him. Without any spoken word, without a single bark, Max had effectively disrupted the flow of the courtroom in a way that no one could have imagined. His actions had not only caught the attention of everyone present, but they had also shifted the dynamic of the case in ways that were about to become impossible to ignore. It was in that moment that the courtroom realized Emma and Max weren't just a child and her dog. They were a team, and together, they had just triggered a moment that would forever alter the course of the trial, and perhaps even the lives of everyone in that room. Max's reaction to Emma's subtle signal was nothing short of extraordinary. What happened next was so unexpected that it left the entire courtroom frozen in shock. It was a moment that no one had anticipated, and one that would forever change the course of the trial and the lives of everyone involved. Max, ever the loyal and intuitive companion, had been waiting for Emma's cue. When he received her silent, almost imperceptible signal, he didn't hesitate. He sprang into action, moving with a sense of purpose that was unlike anything anyone in the room had seen before. As he surged forward, his golden coat gleaming in the courtroom's dim light, there was no mistaking the urgency in his movements. Max wasn't just responding to a simple command. He was acting on an understanding that no one else could comprehend. The dog's behavior wasn't random, and it wasn't a simple attempt to disrupt the proceedings. No, what Max did next was deeply meaningful. He wasn't just reacting to the atmosphere of the room or the tension that hung thick in the air. Max's actions were guided by Emma's unspoken cue, a cue that had been developed over years of quiet trust, a bond that no one could fully grasp unless they had witnessed the two of them together. And in that moment, Max seemed to know exactly what needed to be done. As he moved toward the witness stand, his eyes locked on the woman who had been speaking, one of the key figures in the case. She had been giving testimony for hours, explaining details about the family situation, when Max suddenly positioned himself directly in front of her. His gaze was steady, unwavering, as though he could see something that no one else could. The woman, visibly startled by the dog's sudden appearance, froze. For a moment, it was as though the entire courtroom was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Then, without warning, Max sat down in front of the woman, his body still and alert, his eyes never leaving hers. There was a quiet intensity in his presence, a silent authority that demanded attention. The woman, clearly unsettled by this unexpected interruption, faltered in her speech. Her words became disjointed, her confidence slipping away as she looked down at Max. It was clear that she was rattled by the dog's unblinking stare, and it was at that very moment that the unexpected truth began to unfold. Max's actions were subtle, but they were powerful. He wasn't just a dog sitting in front of a witness. He was creating a shift in the energy of the room. The woman, who had been so sure of her testimony, began to stammer. Her eyes darted nervously, and she seemed unable to continue with the statement she had been making. The more she tried to regain her composure, the more her words seemed to crumble. Her credibility, built over hours of testimony, began to crack under the weight of Max's unspoken intervention. For those in the courtroom, it was as if the room itself had shifted. The tension was no longer about the legal arguments or the documents being presented. It was now about this unexpected moment, about the profound effect that a dog, guided by the silent cue of a young girl, was having on the entire trial. The judge, who had been quiet and composed throughout the proceedings, leaned forward in his chair, his brow furrowed as he watched the scene unfold. The lawyers exchanged confused glances, unsure of what to make of the situation. Even the audience, who had been following the case closely, seemed to sense that something significant was happening, though they could not fully understand it. And then, in the middle of this tense and charged moment, it happened. The woman, whose testimony had been pivotal to the case, finally broke. Her eyes filled with tears, her voice faltering as she admitted that she had misrepresented some key facts about the family. The truth, which had been hidden beneath layers of testimony and argument, began to surface. Her emotional breakdown, triggered by the quiet but unrelenting presence of Max, exposed a lie that had been central to the entire case. What had been seen as a simple misstep or mistake now appeared to be something much more significant, something that could change the trajectory of the trial. Max's actions, guided by Emma's secret signal, had unwittingly unraveled a carefully constructed narrative. The woman's admission, which she could no longer hide, shifted the course of the trial. The implications of this revelation were profound, and no one could have predicted that a simple gesture between a young girl and her dog would lead to such a dramatic turn of events. Emma, who had been quietly watching from her seat, felt a sense of calm wash over her. She hadn't known exactly what would happen when she gave Max the signal, but in that moment, she knew she had done what needed to be done. The courtroom was in complete silence as the weight of the moment settled in. The judge, who had been following the testimony closely, now had a much more complicated case on his hands. The evidence that had seemed so solid just moments before now appeared shaky, uncertain. The truth, exposed by Max's unspoken intervention, would alter the outcome of the trial in ways no one could have predicted. In that single moment, Max had done the unimaginable. His actions, guided by Emma's silent cue, had turned the tide of the trial. The lives of the people involved, Emma's parents, the witnesses, and even the judge, would never be the same. The outcome of the trial was no longer in the hands of legal arguments or evidence. It was now shaped by the bond between a little girl and her dog, a bond that quietly, yet profoundly, changed everything. The moment Max intervened, the courtroom, once filled with murmurs and the sound of legal jargon, fell into stunned silence. It wasn't just a subtle shift in the room. It was as if time itself had momentarily frozen. The reaction from every corner of the courtroom was immediate and unmistakable. Eyes widened in disbelief, jaws dropped, and the once orderly flow of the trial came to a grinding halt. For a split second, it felt as if everyone in the room was holding their breath, unsure of what had just transpired, but certain that something profound had occurred. The first to react was the witness. The woman who had been speaking just moments ago, the one who had been so poised and confident in her testimony, was visibly shaken. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the edge of the witness stand, trying to regain some sense of composure. Her gaze remained fixed on Max, who sat calmly in front of her, his unblinking eyes locked onto hers. The calmness of the dog, in stark contrast to the turmoil she was feeling, seemed almost surreal. She opened her mouth to speak again, but the words never came. The weight of Max's presence, coupled with the unspoken truth of his intervention, was too much for her to bear. Slowly, she looked away, her confidence shattered, her testimony unraveling before her. The judge, a man known for his stoic demeanor and decades of experience in high-stakes cases, was the next to react. His eyes, usually sharp and focused, softened in a rare moment of confusion. He adjusted his glasses, his gavel hovering uncertainly in his hand as he stared at the scene before him. Max, still sitting calmly in front of the witness, seemed completely unaffected by the tension that had exploded around him. The judge's brow furrowed as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. For a moment, he appeared as though he might say something, but the words seemed to be caught in his throat. His usually authoritative voice, which had been guiding the case with precision, now faltered as he struggled to comprehend the unexpected turn of events. The lawyers were next. The defense attorney, who had been confidently laying out his case just moments before, now sat frozen in disbelief. His eyes darted from Max to the witness, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for words, but finding none. The prosecutor, equally stunned, took a slow step back, his hand moving to his chin as he processed the impact of what had just occurred. Both lawyers, who had been locked in a battle of words and strategy, now found themselves completely out of their depth. This wasn't a courtroom drama anymore. It was something else entirely, something beyond the legal tactics they had relied on for so long. For the first time, they were witnessing something that couldn't be explained by rules or precedents. They were witnessing the bond between a young girl and her dog change the entire course of the case. The spectators, many of whom had been following the case from the gallery, were no less shocked. Some gasped, others exchanged wide-eyed glances, unsure what they had just witnessed. Whispers started to ripple through the room, but even these were quickly subdued by the weight of the moment. It was as if the collective energy of the courtroom had shifted, the air thick with astonishment. Some people couldn't look away from Max, whose calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the swirling confusion around him. Others stole glances at Emma, whose face remained composed, as though she knew exactly what had just transpired, though no one else could have possibly understood. The courtroom, usually a place for logic and reason, had been hijacked by something far more intangible, something that couldn't be reasoned away or explained by the usual protocols. The silent, unspoken communication between Emma and Max had just shifted the entire dynamic of the trial. What was once a battle of legal minds had now turned into something more primal, something that no one had prepared for. The power of their bond had become undeniable. It was clear that no one in the room was fully equipped to handle what had just happened. The judge, still in disbelief, finally found his voice. He cleared his throat, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He looked from Max to the witness, then back at the lawyers, as if searching for some indication of what should happen next. His gavel tapped softly against the podium, but the sound seemed almost inconsequential in the face of the revelation that had just occurred. The words that followed were calm, but there was a tremor of uncertainty in his tone. I believe we need a moment," he said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions that had taken over the room. And with that, The courtroom descended into a heavy silence, a silence that felt unnatural in a place that was usually filled with voices, arguments, and legal battles. The moment was still hanging in the air, its impact undeniable. Max's unexpected action had turned the case upside down, and no one was sure how to move forward from this point. The course of the trial had just shifted irrevocably, and with it, the lives of everyone in that room, Emma, Max, the parents, the witnesses, the lawyers, and even the judge, would never be the same again. In that brief, breathtaking moment, the courtroom had experienced something truly extraordinary. The unspoken bond between a child and her dog had just done the unimaginable, and no one could quite grasp the full magnitude of what had just unfolded. The secret signal, so subtle and so simple, had irrevocably changed the course of everything. And as the room sat in stunned silence, all eyes were on Emma and Max, wondering, perhaps, how something so small had led to such profound and unexpected shift in the fabric of the trial. The reaction to Max's unexpected intervention was nothing short of overwhelming. The silence that had fallen over the courtroom was soon replaced by an air of stunned disbelief, mixed with a sense of awe. People in the room, who had been caught up in the legal drama, the strategies, the arguments, now found themselves grappling with something far more intangible, something they couldn't easily explain away. The signal, the simple yet profound bond between Emma and Max, had created a ripple effect that no one could have predicted. For the judge, whose job had always been to make sense of the evidence and arguments, this moment was a stark reminder that the truth wasn't always as clear-cut as it seemed. He had spent years in a world where logic, facts, and procedure ruled the day. But this moment was beyond those boundaries. It wasn't a case of right or wrong, guilty or innocent. It wasn't something that could be neatly filed away under legal precedents. What happened in that courtroom could not be ignored, and it could not be dismissed as just another strange event. The truth of the situation, however hidden or complicated it might have seemed, had been exposed, and it had come to form a quiet, unspoken signal between a little girl and her dog. The ripple effect was felt across the room in various ways. The witnesses, some of whom had been called to testify, were visibly shaken by what had just transpired. They couldn't help but see the emotional power of the moment, the raw honesty of what had just been revealed. It was a reminder that, in a case about a child's future, sometimes the most powerful truths were not found in evidence, but in the subtle things, the emotions, the bonds, the quiet gestures that spoke volumes. Emma and Max's connection had brought to light a truth about the case that had been concealed beneath layers of testimony and arguments. What had seemed like a straightforward legal matter now had a deeper layer, one that no one could have anticipated. The parents, who had been at the center of the trial, found themselves in a state of confusion and introspection. The mother and father, both of whom had spent so much time building their cases, were now left to face the reality of what had just happened. For the first time in the trial, they were forced to confront something they hadn't expected: the truth about their daughter's bond with Max. What had started as a fight for custody, a battle to prove who was a better parent, now seemed less significant compared to the deeper emotional connection that had been laid bare. The bond between Emma and Max had exposed the vulnerability and complexity of their relationship, and the way it had been so easily understood by the dog was a stark contrast to the intricate legal arguments that had been presented for so long. The attorneys, too, were left grappling with the aftermath of the moment. They had trained their entire careers to argue facts, present evidence, and sway decisions with well-crafted legal strategies. But in that moment, they were powerless. Max's intervention had completely shifted the dynamics of the case. The power of emotion, the unspoken language between a child and her dog, had proven stronger than anything they had anticipated. The defense attorney and the prosecutor exchanged uneasy glances, their usual confidence replaced by an uncomfortable silence. They knew that something had shifted, and they were unsure of how to proceed. What everyone in the room learned from this moment was simple, yet profound. The bond between Emma and Max was not just a sentimental connection. It was a bond that transcended the boundaries of Courtroom, a connection that had the power to expose truths that couldn't be ignored. It was a reminder that, sometimes, the most important things in life cannot be captured by legal arguments or evidence. There are things that exist beyond the written word, things that are felt with the heart and understood with the soul. And in this case, it was a quiet, unwavering loyalty between a child and her dog that had shown the way. The truth that emerged from the signal, from the bond between Emma and Max, was undeniable. It wasn't just about the case anymore. It wasn't even about the parents' fight for custody. What had been exposed was the depth of Emma's connection with Max and the emotional impact of that bond. It revealed a truth that no one could ignore, that Max wasn't just a dog. He was a vital part of Emma's emotional well-being, a protector who understood her in ways that no one else could. And that bond, in turn, changed everything. The question of whether justice had been served became more complicated as the courtroom digested the events that had just unfolded. The legal battle, which had seemed so clear-cut before, now appeared clouded with ambiguity. What was best for Emma? Who could truly offer her the stability, the love, and the understanding she needed? Was it the parents, locked in their struggle for dominance? Or was it the simple, quiet companionship between a little girl and her dog that would ultimately provide the answers? In the end, the courtroom did not reach a definitive conclusion just yet. But one thing was certain. The trial had been forever altered. Max's actions had shown everyone present that sometimes justice wasn't found in legal arguments alone. Sometimes it was found in the bond we form with others, the bonds that protect, nurture, and guide us through the most challenging times. And as the trial continued, the room knew that this truth would be impossible to forget. Emma and Max had revealed something far deeper than anyone could have imagined. And the ripples of that moment would be felt long after the trial had ended. Was it just a lucky moment? A random series of events that happened to align in an extraordinary way? Or was it something more, a deeper connection, a force that goes beyond coincidence? When Emma gave that secret signal to Max, the entire courtroom was shaken. In an instant, their bond, built over years of silent understanding, had become the key to something far greater than anyone could have imagined. It leaves us with a question that lingers long after the moment has passed. Was this simply an unforeseen twist of fate, or was it a demonstration of something far more powerful? Something that transcends logic and reason, a bond between a child and her dog that defies explanation? This was more than just a gesture. It was the unspoken language of trust, loyalty, and a deep connection that only those who have truly experienced it can understand. Max's actions weren't just a fluke. They were a testament to the power of communication that goes beyond words, something that speaks to the very heart of what it means to be connected to another soul. Perhaps this wasn't just a coincidence at all. Maybe, just maybe, it was a reminder that in a world full of noise and uncertainty, the deepest bonds are the ones that can change everything. The connection between Emma and Max wasn't just an example of how pets can help us through tough times. It was a lesson in the quiet strength of trust and the impact of small, seemingly insignificant gestures. This was a reminder that sometimes the most meaningful things are the ones that are felt, not seen. From a simple secret signal to a life-changing event, Emma and Max showed us just how powerful a bond can be. It wasn't just a dog responding to the girl. It was a deeper connection, one that transcended the courtroom, the legal drama, and even the emotions that were at play. What happened in that room was a result of years of trust, communication, and loyalty built between a young girl and her dog. It was an action so small, so subtle, that most wouldn't even notice. But in that instant, it proved that sometimes the smallest actions can create the biggest impact. Max's response to Emma's quiet cue wasn't just a lucky coincidence. It was a culmination of a relationship built on understanding, instinct, and love. It changed the entire course of the trial, and in doing so, changed the lives of everyone involved. Emma and Max's story reminds us all that sometimes we don't need to speak to be understood. Sometimes we don't need grand gestures to make a difference. What matters most are the bonds we share and the quiet moments that can change everything. What do you think of Emma and Max's incredible moment? Do you believe it was just a coincidence, or was there something more at play? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more heartwarming stories that remind us of the power of love, loyalty, and connection. We'd love to hear from you. Your thoughts are what make these moments even more special. Don't forget to hit the bell for notifications so you never miss a story that touches your heart. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.